Right. Good morning. Welcome to today's meeting of the Corporate Governance Committee, which is taking place at County Hall in Glenfield. This meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. So, item 1 on the agenda is the minutes. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of November 2022 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is that agreed?
Yeah,
Agreed. Question 2, we have not had any questions from the public. Question 3, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. We've received 4 questions from Mr. Hunt, answers to which have been circulated and published online, and so will be taken on read. Mr. Hunt isn't with us this morning, so we move on to the next item, which is item 4. There are no urgent items. And item 5 is a declaration of interest. Do members have any declarations you wish to make in respect of any items on the agenda?
And my usual one, Mr. Chairman, is a lawyer's mate pensioner.
Thank you. Thanks. We've received no petitions. So on to item 7, which is the first substantive item. This is the risk management update. First we have the presentation. We've got John Wilson and Ashley Epps, Director of Adult. Well, Ashley's not the Director of Adult and Communities. John is, though, who's been promoted overnight. And it's on corporate risk 7.6. If adults and communities fail to provide robust evidence of good practice for the Quality Care Commissioner inspectors, then this will result in a poor inspection outcome and incur reputational risk alongside extra resources and possibly external government to undertake any actions required to make the improvements necessary to fulfil our strategy and duties. So, good morning, John, and over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Chair. So we'll try and get through this fairly quickly, fairly swiftly. The Health and Care Act 2022 reintroduced an assurance process into adult social care. We haven't had a proper assurance process in adult social care services since 2010. So it's some time since we've been through a process of this nature. But the new process will commence from April of this year. Don't know exactly how that will manifest itself as yet, although we've got some indication in terms of the areas that the CQC will be looking to assure, and we know some of the standards that they're looking to address. But it is a new process, and thus far there have only been 2 authorities been subject to partial testing of the new methodology. So it is very new. It's very unknown. That leads to one area of risk, in that we don't have a body of evidence that we can look to in order to understand where we might fit within the spectrum that they'll be looking at. We may get a call on the 1st of April. We may not get a call for 6 months, 9 months or 12 months. There are 152 authorities to assure. The CQC are still in the process or developing their own capacity to undertake all of those assurance visits. So it could be that it could be somewhere down the line, or we could get a call on the 1st of April and be asked to provide the evidence. So under the new assurance process, the Care Quality Commission will assess all councils against a standard methodology. It'll be very similar to Ofsted. There'll be a single word judgment at the end of the process, from outstanding, good, requires improvement or inadequate. We've been working as a department over the last 6 months to develop our own understanding of the assurance process and to develop our self-assessment document. Each local authority will be required, similar to the Ofsted process, to develop a self-assessment, which will then be tested by the CQC through a sort of a 360-degree assurance process. So we developed, we added an item into our own departmental risk register, and that then led to an escalation onto the corporate risk register. Fair to say that over the course of that 6-month period, we have reduced the level of risk, our analysis of the level of risk, simply through the work that we've been doing, the mitigations we've been putting in place. But nevertheless, there is a level of risk which remains. So in terms of what it is that the CQC will assure us on, there are 4 domains. First is working with people. So that's all about the well-being principle within the Care Act, how we create well-being for people, how we enable people to live independently, the way that we assess people, our care and support planning processes. They'll be looking at how we provide support, and particularly how we manage the care market, and whether there's a good quality care market with sufficient choice for people. But also looking at our partnership arrangements, and particularly those sorts of transitional arrangements where people might come from a health setting into a social care setting, or from a children's service into an adult service, are key areas that they'll be looking at. There's an area around safety and safeguarding, and how we manage risk and how we ensure that people are safeguarded from harm. And then the 4th area is around leadership. Do we have caring, compassionate leaders? Do we have capable leaders? Do we have an appropriate governance and performance system in place? And are we a learning organisation that is open to innovation and new ideas? And within all of that, each of those areas will have a rating on the sort of the inadequate through to the outstanding, and then there'll be one single overall rating. But there will be limiting factors within there. So, for example, if an authority is deemed to be inadequate in ensuring safety, it's very likely that they would be deemed inadequate overall, or that certainly that would be a limiting factor. Similarly, if an authority were deemed to be inadequate in leadership, it's more likely that that would lead to some form of intervention externally by the Secretary of State. So within the new guidance, the Secretary of State has the powers to intervene in local authorities that are seen to be failing in their Care Act duties. That level of intervention could be anything from possibly an improvement partner coming in and working with the council, some form of improvement panel process, through to direct intervention, whereby the Secretary of State would require external commissioners to come in and potentially run the services, or would ask another local authority to come in and run the services. So the intervention powers are quite wide-ranging, and it all sort of hinges on, at the end of the day, the CQC's view of the capacity and the capability of the local authority to address any concerns that might be raised. So in terms of the overall risk, I won't read through it, you've just read it, Chair. I think it's probably fair to say that we, as I said earlier, through the work that we are doing, we are mitigating the risks to some degree. And we're getting a greater understanding both of the process, the methodology, but also our own assessment of where we might land within that. There are some factors which Ashley is just going to go through very briefly in a minute, which you will see. We are rating ourselves as red. We haven't put we haven't used the CQC methodology deliberately at this point, but we have sort of RAG rated where we think we lie against the standards. And you'll see that there are some areas where we have a significant risk, and there are other areas where we think we are particularly strong. So I'll just let Ashley just run through those areas.
Thanks. Thank you. So, yeah, so as John mentioned, so we're sort of in preparation for the CQC inspection. We've been developing a self-assessment initially, which sort of is intended to set out our understanding of our performance, which is kind of looking at the whole council in terms of delivery of Care Act duties, but primarily adult social care. And that's being, the self-assessment's based on sort of internal engagement with staff, as well as external engagement with all of our key stakeholders, which is just starting to take place now. So yeah, so I think broadly the sort of dates we're aiming for to kind of finalise that, sort of 17th of February, we'll have a draft version of that together. with an improvement plan as well. So it'll set out our understanding of our performance and our plans to improve. And the final version will be signed off sort of in March. So in terms of our initial findings so far, just pulled out on these slides like areas for improvement basically. So you can see the sort of theme is on the far left, how clear it is actually, but and then sort of we've broken it down into some key topic areas. So in terms of our sort of focus on well-being and prevention throughout sort of care and support, we know that there's a strong focus in our sort of plans and strategies, and we have a good well-being offer in sort of communities and well-being services, public health, etc. But some of the feedback from service users and carers isn't so positive around their care experiences, particularly in terms of sort of social contact. And also people, there's a sort of further measure around sort of social care related quality of life. And we don't seem to compare too well against other councils on sort of feedback in that area either. So we're sort of exploring the reasons for that, and partly through that external engagement with service users and carers, we hope to sort of find out more so we can build that into the improvement plan. In terms of access to information and advice, so again, feedback on that area isn't particularly strong. So, and that's probably our main area, one of the top two main areas to focus on at the moment. So we know that there's a lot of work going on in the department to kind of improve that. So upgrades to the website, promoting online access channels like self-assessments that you can do online. There's a review of the service directory, which is like the list of services online that people can just access from the community. 3 conversations pilots and a review of customer service centre. So there's lots going on, and there's also other areas that we're currently exploring. So whether we can provide more kind of printed materials for people, so like leaflets with information and advice, and sort of advertise that better in the community. So I think that's going to be a key area for us to kind of focus on. Also, you can see unpaid carers as well. So we can't rate that positively just for the same reason that we haven't got good feedback around sort of access to information. There is the new carers strategy as well, which has a strong focus on that too. In terms of providing support, which is the sort of market shaping commissioning kind of theme, I think it seems quite a strong area generally. So, but we know that there's a sort of lack of specialist commissioning strategies. So we have clear commissioning intentions across adult social care to guide the market on where we're heading in terms of our commissioning. There's a market position statement in development as well, and sort of regular provider engagement. But what we think is potentially lacking is sort of strategies focused on particular service user groups. So potentially some more detail about how we intend to commission for people with learning disabilities or people with mental health issues or older people, for example. There's also always an opportunity to increase the level of co-production in the development of commissioning strategies. So working with service users and carers to develop those, and a lot of work's going on to kind of improve that. So we've recently commissioned a sort of consultancy to help us embed co-production more in those kind of processes. So they're going to help us in that area as well. In terms of the care workforce, so whilst our vacancy rate is lower than national average in Leicestershire across the sort of care workforce, we have a higher turnover rate than the national average. So and there's also sort of workforce pressures in certain areas. Sorry, like domiciliary care, where sort of people need their own transport to sort of be employed in those areas. So we need to sort of obviously address that as well. Sorry, always lose my voice this time of the morning. So it's supporting innovation in care and support. We actually have quite a few examples of innovation that we can highlight there. So sort of digitalization, 3 conversations, etc. But we can't sort of rate it. We didn't think we could rate it green just because there's sort of opportunities to do more potentially in that area, and sort of staff feedback suggests that we can do more. So particularly sort of non-digital innovation, for example. So that's just, oh, thank you, cheers. That's just something we can sort of look at. Okay, so in terms of ensuring safety, which is the kind of safeguarding theme, there's possibly an opportunity to increase the level of training uptake by providers, but that's not a major concern. I think national data suggests that sort of service users don't seem to feel that services made them feel safe, and compared to other councils, and sort of not sure what the reasons are for that. So again, it's something that we need to explore through the external engagement that we carry out. So we need to get more qualitative feedback from people, basically, rather than just the ratings, so we know the reasons and can sort of address them. In terms of demand management around safeguarding, so there aren't high numbers of people awaiting assessment and review, but there are sort of probably more than we'd want to be. So generally those processes are managed well, but it tends to be sort of safeguarding cases where it relates to an organisation. So it's like an organisational safeguarding case, and they stay open longer than we sort of aim for. Staff have sort of suggested that there's a need for sort of more resources and skilled staff in safeguarding. That doesn't seem to be reflected in the sort of vacancy rates data that we've seen so far, but we need to explore that further. And there's also an opportunity to increase staff safeguarding training uptake as well. So across the care pathway, making sure that all staff have completed their sort of core safeguarding training. And finally, on the safeguarding theme, colleagues from Commissioning and Quality have sort of raised a concern about sort of not necessarily receiving all of the reports about safeguarding inquiries that have been linked to a contracted provider. So I think they carried out a sort of review from June 2021 to 22, looking at the sort of number of safeguarding inquiries that were raised or that affected a provider versus the number that Quality and Contracts sort of received notification of, and it was around sort of half of them that they hadn't received, which might sort of impact their ability to kind of, I suppose, choose between providers based on safeguarding concerns. So, so that's something that's being sort of explored more now, and certainly a priority for that theme to address. And finally, on leadership, I would say probably as well on safeguarding, that's a strong area generally. So I think it's just those kind of areas, that those bits there that we've picked out that we need to improve on. And leadership as well is also seemingly a very strong area. So this picks up a lot of the sort of governance around the council as well as in the department, and all the focus on equalities, continuous improvement and innovation, etc. We know that the staff survey results from 2021, which we obviously need to refresh, suggest that disabled staff feel less satisfied across a whole range of kind of questions than all other staff. So, so that's something that our equalities group in the department is planning to sort of focus on this year, alongside some other areas. And yeah, finally, probably the other top two kind of areas for improvement is the kind of co-production. So sort of CQC have a strong focus on sort of trying to embed personalised care and support and co-production in how councils develop services. They're really keen to hear the voice of people with lived experience in our self-assessment as well. And we know that as a department, there's an opportunity or a need really to improve the extent to which we co-produce new strategies, plans, service changes, etc. So working with people with lived experience more as kind of equal partners in decision making. And there is a lot of work going on there. Like we are at the moment revitalising our engagement panel, which is a group of people with lived experience of accessing adult social care, and serves to kind of advise us on how we engage the public, as well as participate in sort of co-production initiatives themselves. So yeah, and obviously that co-production consultancy support we've commissioned as well should help us in that area. So I think that's broadly it, unless someone wants to pick up anything.
Okay, thank you very much, John and Ashley, for the presentation. So, members, have you got any questions or queries? Mr. Walter.
Yeah, you're not the first authority to go under this new regime. Did you contact your other authorities already been run by the CQC, see how they got on, or did you not contact them at all?
So the process only commences in April. of this year. So there aren't any other authorities that have been through the process as yet. There have been 2 authorities, Hampshire and Manchester, who have been subject to partial testing of the methodology. So the CQC went into both Hampshire and Manchester and tested, and one of those 4 standards that Ashley just run through, they tested 1 or 2 of those in each of those 2 authorities. And we have had conversations with Hampshire and Manchester, and they have shared some of the learning from that. But there aren't any other authorities who have been through the process yet, because it hasn't yet. It only starts in April of this year.
Okay, so have we any other questions? I've just got one question from Ashley's presentation. You mentioned that getting safeguarding information from external providers was not quite up to standard. I mean, what can we do to improve that? Because it is not something directly under our control.
Yeah, thanks. No, you're right. It's sort of in terms of providers reporting safeguarding incidents to CQC and other partners, that's their responsibility. But then sort of discussions with colleagues highlight that we need to sort of be aware of those kind of issues ourselves as well, so that can guide commissioning decisions.
Yeah.
And so it seemed to come down to, and I'm not by any means an expert in this area, so I'd probably have to defer to John as well, but seemed to come down to sort of training about sort of how staff manage safeguarding inquiries. So when a safeguarding inquiry comes in, I was informed that that worker needs to kind of raise it as an alert and sort of share that with commissioning and quality as well. But I'm sure John knows more.
Well, I suppose it is a contractual requirement. So all our contracted providers are required within their contracts to inform us and inform the CQC of any safeguarding alerts. We do audit each of those providers against those contracts. Of course, there is an element of it's a retrospective audit, so you find out kind of retrospectively if there are safeguarding alerts that we weren't necessarily aware of when we should have been aware of them. So you can only then take retrospective action. But it is about working with the sector, making sure, as Ashley said, that everybody has had the training, particularly the managers of those services and the leaders of those services, because they're the people who are ultimately responsible for making sure that those alerts are made and made in a timely way.
Okay, thank you very much. So if we have no other questions, and we don't appear to have, we'll move on to the risk management report, which we've all had a good look at that. But over to Neil, Head of Internal Services, to present.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. So yes, this is the routine quarterly update of the corporate risk register, but on this occasion there are 2 additional appendices which cover off the annual reviews and revisions of policies relating to risk management and insurance. So I'll be talking about those later. Paragraph 5 of the report just mentions that there has been a new risk added to the register at number 7.7, and this risk is around a demand and capacity issue in children's SEND services, which could leave the council vulnerable to complaints. Corporate risk reported at the previous committee in November remained on the register, albeit there have been recent updates provided for all of them, and a number of scores and directions of travel are amended. These are shown in Appendix A, pages 19 to 38, and I'll take questions on those later, including providing an update which was requested by the committee on the Arriva risk 4.2. Paragraph 7 to 10 in the main report explain the annual reviews and the revisions of the risk management and insurance policies have been undertaken. Then the revised policies appear as Appendices B, pages 39 to 64, and Appendix C, which is 65, 67. And to assist members, the review of those changes to the policies are highlighted yellow. And just to mention that for the insurance policy, there are 3 projects underway, the outcomes of which I should be able to report back to committee at the back end of May. So I think that's the cover report. I'll take questions on Appendix A, gladly take questions on Appendix A, and then I will come back to Appendix B and C. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. So have members got any questions on Appendix A in the report? No. Okay, we have no questions. So Neil, I'll back to you again.
Sorry, Chair, if there are no questions, because it was requested at committee, I just wish to update the committee on the Arriva risk. It was
Please do.
No, it was minuted that we'd provide an update. So risk 4.2 is the long-standing Arriva risk, which has been to the committee a number of times now. And the committee is aware that we have brought positive messages back and then occasionally had to go back again to find out the update. The most recent update is, and it is very recent, is that the county has met with its city counterparts at the beginning of this week, actually, and a final sort of follow-up meeting is now scheduled with Arriva in early February to discuss the proposed payment. So I'm sorry I can't close it off at this point, but it is that near again to having some information to provide to members.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Mr. Walter.
So I assume at the next meeting there'll be a full report on this, will the Chair? The outcome?
Neil.
I can certainly provide an update. I mean, I don't know how much of a full report it will be. I can talk to the director and just see what level of, because there may be some confidential commercial information within the negotiations. So I will discuss an update. Certainly, I mean, it's May, so it's a long time off.
Okay, so we will get an update. That's fine. So Neil, over to you for Appendix B.
No further questions on Appendix A. In which case, can I just briefly mention Appendix B? So that is an update to the risk management policy and strategy. It's the annual update, and we do this in coordination with the presentation of the MTFS. So I mentioned, I'm having trouble here to find my page. I mentioned that some areas are highlighted, and I just wanted to cover off a few of those in terms of helping the committee through. So the first one is on page 42. So we've just added in a section there on the management requirements for sound risk management, both to the statutory and constitutional requirements. I'm now going to go to page 44. Bear with me. And there's it's not highlighted on your copy, unfortunately, but there is middle of the page. The chief officers have confirmed that they are still supporting an overall risk appetite of open. I'm now going to go to page 45, just a couple more of these. And that reports towards just above paragraph 7 that whilst it's not formally concluded, the external auditor has actually reported positively again on the council's risk management arrangements, and also that we'll be carrying out a further external review later in this year. Page 48. We have just to mention the second bullet point. Really, we did promise some time ago. We bring regular updates on the corporate risks, but the actual site of the detailed corporate risk register hasn't been brought to the committee for a while. So we've written that back into the policy now, and we'll begin a full copy of the register, including the controls that are in place to try and mitigate the risks going forward. And then finally on this appendix, I think page 57. Just finally, at the bottom of page 57, again, it's not highlighted, but just a confirmation, again, that chief officers had the opportunity to look at the level of risks that were brought, taken to them and subsequently to this committee, and they chose to keep the level of risk scores at 15. So those risks are at least debated at corporate management team and then brought to this committee. So are there any questions on Appendix B?
Thanks.
If not, I've just got very quick update on Appendix C.
Okay, so
Which is the insurance policy. And just to say, that's just top page 65 really. Just to bring members' attention, so the insurance policy was fairly staid last year. This year, there's 3 areas brought in terms of we've just undertaken a broker re-procurement, and the tenders are being evaluated. We're due to receive a report on an exercise on total cost of risk, which is looking forward in terms of our future programs of insurance. And finally, on the last page of the policy, I think it is, we're talking about we've begun negotiations over an actual valuation of our reserves. So looking at are the level of reserves sufficient or too high to meet our value of claims. So those 3 projects are all underway. They're mentioned in the policy. I hope to be able to bring a report to the May committee on how the outcomes of those.
thanks very much, Neil. I mean, the insurance policy is fairly clear. Mr. Richardson.
It was only really on the insurance policy side. I mean, must be, what, 3-4 years ago since we had last presentation on the insurance, which we found somewhat fascinating. But I just wondered, in light of issues we've had, particularly with the issue of the farm, which obviously cost us some £2.5 million, we talk about insurance cover there. So do we actually insure the farms, or do we, which it implies here, or do we insist the tenants insure the farms, and therefore do we review their policies? So in the light of the issue we had on the farm, are we looking to insure against such risk going forward? And if not, why not? Or are we expecting the people to do it? Is the amount of the insurance sufficient, bearing in mind the value of our farm holdings and assets particularly? And it also applies to commercial properties going forward. And what would be extremely useful is, I understand why we do a self-insured limit, but it would be useful to see a correlation between what the premium would be and what it is, because we take the self-insured limit, because we can only evaluate as a committee if it's worth taking the self-insured limit if we understand what the saving is to the council, and therefore how much of a risk we're entering into by taking that self-insured risk.
I think there are a number of points I'll just try and remember to pick up on that. But firstly, there was an intention for the May committee to have the broker do a presentation. We're probably going to push that back to the September committee to get more information to the Committee on Insurance in general. Do we insure the farms? Yes, but we recharge the tenants. Had we got cover for the farm incident? No, we weren't covered for that. Nevertheless, one of those exercises that is underway now is looking into, have we got the right levels of cover across where we want to be in 5 and 10 years' time? So that would be on the agenda to say, do we need that sort of cover? And the final question was on self-insured retentions. So yes, again, both exercises are underway. The latter 2 are covering off those in terms of self-insured retention. Are they right for the level of risk that we want to cover as a county council, and in terms of the future? So there will be more details brought back to those as to decisions made around those.
Thank you, Neil. Yep.
Thanks for that, Neil. That's great, because I mean, the issue I'm interested in really is something like the farm. I mean, to my way of thinking, had we had adequate inspections, which we clearly didn't, we would have picked up the issue earlier. And therefore, there's a correlation between what you might pay for an insurance policy and actually what you might pay for employing agents to actually do for more recent inspections or more periodic receptions, so we can correlate between the 2. So it would also be useful if we're looking at self-insured risk, how we're going to match that with the period frequency for inspections of our property, which strikes me as somewhat inadequate at the moment following the issue we had, which I appreciate was exceptional. But even so, one exceptional one at £2.5 million, it employs a lot of people for a large number of years.
I mean, you're obviously right to pick out. There's obviously sort of three buckets of costs, and it's the balance between them. You know, sort of the loss incurred in the inspection regime or in insuring it. I think the insurance piece is difficult because it tends to be a general exclusion around environmental. But you know, you're right. We need to look at how we get in the balance between the three rights. So we did commit to look at it, and the place to probably bring it back is when we bring the annual report in September, which will be sort of a year on from when the last one, and sort of go through actually what's changed on those factors. But it's a tricky one because we've got to give the tenants quiet enjoyment. But you're quite right. If you give them too much quiet enjoyment, then you don't know what's sort of happening with your farm estates. But we'll bring something back probably September time.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Walter.
As Terry has brought it up, I'll just continue the conversation about the farm. It concerns me that this went on for a number of years and nobody picked it up. Don't we inspect our properties at all? And if not, why not? I mean, any landlord normally goes around the property at least once a year and make sure things are in order. Just let the farm rent out and nobody goes to check on them?
I don't think it did go on for several years. Actually, Gary may know more because it was the trading standards kind of section that sort of picked up the initial issues. But I think we do inspect the properties, but we can't sort of be there all the time. Like I said, there's that phrase quiet enjoyment, that they do have that entitlement to kind of sort of operate the farm. So there is a balance between kind of A, the cost, but B, actually not just sort of breaching the tenants' rights as well. But I don't know whether Gary's got any bits to add, because like I say, it was a trading standards sort of initially picked this up.
So, Gary.
It was initially a trading standards referral, and it related actually to animal byproducts that were being stored there. Very poor farming practices, and we were called out to deal with the byproducts issue. It then got a lot bigger in terms of an investigation involving the Environment Agency, because there was fly tipping taking place and all sorts of hazardous substances. So our inquiry was completed fairly quickly, in the sense that the tenant himself was subject to further investigation, and there was a current court matter which was unrelated to the trading standards inquiry. But I think the clean-up operation then spread into a much wider issue than animal health in terms of animal byproducts. But the clean-up exercise for the animal byproducts would have been considerable. But as they explored what they were dealing with, the reason trading standards got pulled in, it actually was linked to an insurance claim regarding a potential fraudulent insurance claim regarding the death of some cattle. And that's how it came to trading standards' attention. But it's a much wider issue involving other agencies.
Thank you. So, have we got any other questions?
Surely, Chair, though, in the lease agreement, there should be a clause somewhere that the county council, as the landlord, has the right to inspect the property on a regular basis.
Yeah, Gary.
That I can address from a trading standards point of view.
We do have the right to inspect, but it's back to that balance that sort of talked about sort of Mr. Richards, you know, how much sort of time you sort of and effort you sort of spend on inspection versus how much you're sort of interfering with sort of the tenant's business. But we do have that right to inspect, and there is sort of people who kind of are employed to do the inspections. But you can imagine as well with a farm estate, it's quite, you know, geographically spread, and the sort of this sites are big as well. So it's kind of, it's not something we want to happen. It's something we, you know, we'll obviously tighten things up to sort of reduce the risk that it happens. But if you're going to have kind of, you know, sort of a farm estate, there's only so much you can do, you know, and over a period of time, you know, we've had the farm estates for, you know, for decades and decades. Things like this are going to happen, but we've just got to try and minimise the risk. And, you know, we will look at that sort of the frequency of the inspection regimes.
Okay, so I think the right is there. It's just how often we exercise that right. Laura.
Yes, I was just going to come in briefly, if I may, to follow up on Declan's point. He's right that the farms will be subject to an agricultural tenancy. I think we'll probably use standard terms for that, but it will confer a right of inspection at specified intervals. I don't know, I'm afraid, what those are. But as Declan said, there's a right also for the tenant to have peaceable and quiet enjoyment of the premises. So you're not able to go around sort of weekly or monthly. That would be a sort of interference with those rights. But I'm just wondering whether it might be helpful to the committee when we report on this at the annual report in September, if we perhaps include a summary of the main terms of a standard council farm lease. It might help members to understand what the provisions are in there that are ordinarily applied. And of course, unfortunately, exceptionally, this sort of issue does crop up, but I don't know that there's a common problem with our farms. I've certainly not come across my radar if there is. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lauren. I think that would be useful. And whereas I fully understand all the question and everything else. This is a exceptional occurrence. It certainly wasn't normal activity that was taking place, and it costs a lot of money, and we want to try and prevent it happening again. And I fully understand that. So, are there any other questions? There are not any other questions. So moving to the recommendations then, which are set out on page 17 of the agenda pack. Firstly, can we note the presentation provided by John Wilson and Ashley Epps on risk 7.6 and the updated risk report now provided? Everybody happy with that? Yeah. Regarding recommendation 8, the committee is asked to approve the current status of the strategic risks facing the County Council. I am happy to move this recommendation. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Neil. Thank you. I take this as agreed if there's no dissent. No, and there is no dissent. So that is agreed. Regarding recommendation B, a presentation on treasury management has been proposed at the next meeting. Can I take that as agreed? Yeah, agreed. With regard to recommendation C, can I take the updates regarding the risk management policy statement and strategy and insurance policy as being duly noted? I take that as agreed, yeah. So the next item is the RIPA and the Investigation Powers Act 2016, the regulation of investigatory powers, which is on page 69 to 78 of our report. And we have Gary Connors, Head of Regulatory Services, here this morning, who will present it. I think we all have read the report. So over to you, Gary. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. For the benefit of members, it is rather a mouthful. The Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, so I'll refer to it as a RIPA, which tends to be the general reference. It essentially deals with the use by the County Council of covert surveillance techniques to obtain evidence relating to criminal investigations. Paragraph 2 explains that the RIPA codes of practice require members to review the Council's RIPA policy and just to make sure it remains fit for purpose. Paragraph 4 it talks about covert surveillance, which from the County Council's perspective, the focus is on that it is firstly lawful, that it's necessary and proportionate. And there is an internal process of authorisation, and there are additional safeguards relating to directed surveillance and covert human intelligence sources, which I'll briefly explain in a moment, which requires judicial approval. So you have an internal authorisation system, and then we're off to the Magistrates Court to seek their approval. Part 5 explains that there are 3 types of surveillance. Directed surveillance essentially is observing, as you would know it to be. Covert human intelligence sources, again, a little bit of a mouthful, CHIS for short. In a county council context, this essentially is officers, trading standards officers in the main, operating as test purchasers in a covert environment. So, for example, purchasing illicit tobacco to establish a supply chain. And the third area is communications data, but I would emphasise that we are not a relevant authority to obtain the content of a communication. This is essentially about tracing the subscriber, for example, of a mobile phone. Paragraph 14 describes the use of RIPA, that from the 1st of January to the 31st of December. You'll see their activity is relatively low. We're talking really here about trading standards, criminal investigations, and those activities relate over the last year to rogue builders, the supply of counterfeit products, identifying scam websites, and illicit tobacco and alcohol sales, which are a fairly common problem for us at the minute. So they all relate to criminal investigations. I can say that most of those, in fact, all of them this year, have resulted in criminal prosecutions with convictions. The Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office is the office that has oversight. And in April 2022, last year, we had an inspection, and you'll see there in paragraph 17, the outcome was very satisfactory. The inspector was impressed by the standard of the documentation presented to him and felt that the staff had a good awareness of RIPA. From a policy point of view, the policies published on the RIPA homepage on the County Council intranet site. And one of the key factors is to ensure that outside of the Trading Standards Service, outside of an enforcement environment, that other senior managers within the County Council understand the basics of RIPA and are able to take advice should they wish to seek it. So it's all about really raising the awareness to avoid unlawful surveillance activity taking place. You may remember years ago, they used to call it, the press were referring to it as the Snoopers Charter. All sorts of stories about cameras going into wheelie bins and cameras being installed to ensure that people were living within the catchment area of a school. That's certainly not the case here, and hopefully that report to you, gives you some assurance that we only use that covert surveillance when it's necessary to do so. And the recommendations are in para 18, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gary. I think that's a fairly comprehensive report and shows that we're certainly not using powers indiscriminately. Given the times we have actually used them, have resulted in criminal prosecutions and conviction. Has anybody else got any queries on this? Yep, Neil.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for the report, Gary. And in respect of the report about the 5 surveillance activities that have taken place in the last 12 months, all involved prosecutions and all involved in a successful conviction being obtained. I take it from that then that in respect of those surveillance activities, there was no challenge to the obtaining of the evidence in that way. And in fact, has there ever been any challenge in respect of the surveillance evidence that's been obtained under RIPA by use of this council?
It's certainly something that arises as part of the disclosure process when we're involved in the prosecution process. I can think of only one occasion where we submitted a CHIS application relating to a number of illicit tobacco premises that we wish to do test purchases on, and there was one premises in which the magistrate considered that the council ought to do a little bit more advice, and so it works in terms of the judicial approval. But apart from that remote occasion, we're fairly robust internally before we get through to the court system. So we've never had any significant legal challenges on it. Disclosure always arises as possible gateways to challenge a case going forward on a legal technicality maybe. But in terms of the approval process, we've never had a challenge, but I wouldn't say by concluding on that the challenge isn't robust at the Magistrates' Court. They ask quite a number of questions about the necessity and proportionality area, particularly because it's a local authority and the sensitivities around it.
Thank you, Chairman. Confirmation we're well prepared when we go into the court situation. Thank you.
Very, very much so. Thank you very much, Gary. So can I take the report as being noted that all the comments made will be captured in the minutes in the usual way? Yeah.
What about in the time that I've been representing people, I've just noticed a general rise of criminality, which of all sorts, which was never there when we start, years ago. If it was there, I mean, it was this low-level drug taking and dealing, and which everybody seems to sort of turn a blind eye to because they can't do anything about it. It ends up with someone dying because of, the more that we can actually try to do our best to protect people, the better, I think, and all strength to your elbow. You've certainly got my support in everything you do.
Thanks for those comments, Mr. Bell. Yeah, I think we'd all agree with that. So can we take this as noted, and all the comments will be in the minutes? Is that taken as agreed? Agreed. Thank you. So we now move on to item 10. We have the report on the contract exceptions. Oh, right. Which item 9? Yeah, sorry, my eyesight's not that good. Next is the Resilience and Business Continuity Annual Update on pages 79 to 86. Zafar Salim, Head of Communities, Policy and Resilience, will introduce before handing over to Mark Warden, Resilience and Business Continuity Manager. So good morning, Zafar. Over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Chair. As this is an annual report, I'll try and pick out some of the developments over the last year. I think probably the starting off is maybe the obvious. I think the operating arena has probably worsened over the last year, in terms of the amount of challenge in environments, whether that's climate change, severe wedding. I was going to say severe weddings then. I don't know. I guess some weddings are quite severe, but severe weather, environment, together with obviously national and international events. Obviously, the most prominent one, the one that's more to the fore, is actually the Ukraine war. And clearly, these national, local, international, even regional events do have an impact on the county council, but also more widely the local communities and our partners. So it's probably increasingly important that we have good business continuity plans in place, that we have emergency plans and procedures and protocols in place, and that we test these plans, procedures and protocols, because I think you'll see within the report there's reference to Manchester Arena and Grenfell and various other inquiries. And I think it's safe to say, there's been significant criticism because it's all well and good having plans, policies and procedures, but in some cases, if they're in a cupboard and no one can find the key to that cupboard, or everyone turns up and no one knows whose turn it is to go in to put the fire out or rescue the people, then those plans aren't particularly good and they haven't been tested. So I think that overall context and environment's important, which is why we put a lot of emphasis this year on trying to basically review all the policies and procedures in place, make sure that our managers, our heads of service, our team leaders are clear that the business continuity plans are robust, that they've reached out to our contractors to make sure the contractors are aware of their legal obligations, because if there is a failure, certainly supplier failure and critical supplier failure, then ultimately we will be responsible for not only the cost, but clearly a large number of those people, if they're critical, they're vulnerable clients and vulnerable environments. So that's what we've done this year, the focus this year. In terms of where we're at, I think it's fair to say, although COVID occurred, it seems like ages ago now, in March, April 2020, we've still really been on what we'd call a sort of like a battle rhythm and a war footing since then. We've not really stood down because there's been various incidents that they're highlighted in the report, both affecting the city, but also as we're a partnership, we support them, they support us, we support the districts, the police, fire, etc. And as you know, there's ongoing industrial action affecting the NHS
and the ambulance service, which we are supporting as well. So we've sort of been in a continuous state of response for the last couple of years, and I can't see, as head of service, I can't see that actually changing going forward. So it then presents a challenge, as highlighted there in paragraph 9 onwards, in terms of concurrent incidents. So how do we manage multiple incidents all happening at the same time, given capacity and capability issues? We're awaiting at paragraphs 12 to 14 and 15 there, we're awaiting fuller details of the Manchester Marina inquiry, similarly Grenfell, and at the same time there's a national review of a civil contingency, mainly driven by COVID and the COVID response and recovery, but there's clearly Manchester is going to affect that as well, and Grenfell. Probably of note for this committee, as it says in paragraph 14 there, I think there'll be a much stronger role for elected members moving forward. Now, the detail isn't there. I mean, the framework is out. It's approximately 75 pages so far. But despite that, actually, there isn't a lot of detail. There's a lot of narrative about the understanding the problem that we're trying to fix, but in terms of the solutions, it doesn't offer any, in particular around the funding arrangements. At the moment, we work on a partnership arrangement where the districts, the councils, the police, the fire and rescue, the NHS, we all contribute to the running of the local resilience forum. But that's through goodwill more than anything else. I think some of that will be put onto a statutory footing going forward. And as I said, another significant development through that is the appointment of a chief resilience officer. Again, we don't know how that would operate. That could be at the level of the police and crime commissioner, for example, or it could be another duty assigned to head of paid service, which would be Mr. Sinnott here, or indeed it could be a lead, it could be a member. So that details to be confirmed. And again, I suspect what will happen is that the resilience work will be aligned or brought into probably the council's constitution or a number of local authorities' constitutions, and then formally reported that way, because at the moment it's a body that sits out of, for example, FOI procedures, data protection and other things, because technically it's a partnership rather than a statutory body. In terms of other things to draw the committee's attention to, we've carried out a whole range of training and exercising this year. Mark can give more details if committee requires, and we've responded to a number of incidents which members are probably aware of, in particular some of the ICT challenges, and I think cyber risk again is a big challenge going forward, because there are clearly actors out there. They are rogue states. They have tackled or challenged public sector, the NHS. Some of it's around blackmail, some of it's just mischief, some of it's ransom. But we've got robust procedures in place. And there's some examples where we've had to respond in real time, in particular the Microsoft Enterprise downgrade issue, and then the denial of various parts of the council's web pages. So there's some of the incidents within the county. There's also been some multi-agency responses within the city and the wider county. Probably again, the biggest one that members will be aware of is the Leicester East disorder. So that was some of the factions within the city. Again, we did, although it was a city, we border them. We have the same catchment areas for schools, for example, in particular the Oadby and Wigston area. So we have been supporting the City Council both in the response, but also the recovery and the lessons learned from that. And we work extensively with the police and the City Council on some of the recovery work. Probably the last 2 points from me is at the last meeting we had a year ago, there was concern by members raised the point around lessons learned not actually being identified and being shared with the committee. And secondly, how do members become aware of incidents in real time? So what we tried to address that in paragraphs 22 and 23 of the report. So in terms of reports, lesson learned, debriefs, etc., although these fall under the auspices of the the RPG, we've agreed with RPG and Democratic Services that will aggregate all of that information into a single report and then make that available on the intranet site, and then also make that available to elected members and this committee. And secondly, in terms of real-time incidents, we've reached agreement that with communications team and RPG that depend on what the incident is, the members with responsibility for that electoral division will be notified as the incident progresses, depending on what it is. Obviously, if it's a low-level one, there's probably no need. However, if it's significant, Mark wants to pick up anything.
Okay, look, thanks very much. A very comprehensive report, and I think in many ways the way that we've seen a number of incidents happen over the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and they've all been dealt with. So the system does actually work, which is, very reassuring. Have members got any questions or queries on this? Mr. Richardson.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Zephyr. I welcome the report that's going to come out on the intranet. I think that would be useful, because I think the comment I made last year was, even from this report, I get no sense of the outcomes. So it's all well and good developing policies, etc. But what has the team actually physically done? What are the outcomes of that? So, just as in the illustration, you say notify members of ongoing incidents, paragraph 23. So how many members in the last 12 months have been notified of incidents? Just as an example, it gives us a flavour then of what the team is doing. I mean, we talk about COVID, so bear in mind this is probably more a public health issue than a resilience forum. So what is ongoing work for this council in COVID that we're still doing? So it's just that flavour of what is actually physically being done. What is the outcome of the work that's being done? How many people are being affected and benefited by what is being done? Which is what I still don't understand.
Thank you, Mr. I think that would be the level of in terms of most incidents, they do pass off without the need for really beyond business as usual. So most is, as is indicated in the report, it's just managed in-house. So if we have, for example, a supplier failure, a critical supplier failure, that may be a care home, for example, then those vulnerable residents would be moved out, another supplier would be found. Similarly, if there was a local flood or something else along those lines, then there would be a response. The response would be either people stay put or they're moved out into an evacuation centre, then adult social care, depending on whether children are involved, children's social care will be involved, and then they'll be evacuated and to a rest centre, and then some provision being put in until it was safe enough for them to return to their property. So that's the normal level of detail, which will go into a composite report, which will then again be made available to all members. And again, if that's of significance within that geographical area, then working with the districts and the relevant members within that area will be given that real-time information that this is where the evacuation centre is, this is how many people have been evacuated, this is a no-go area, this is how long the incident's going to last, this is the lead contact person, whether it's an inspector or someone from the fire service. So that's the level of detail that will be provided in both those cases.
Mr. Richardson.
Yeah, I understand all that. I understand the theory. What I'm trying to do is get a flavour of, so how many incidents have we, had to look at in the last 12 months? What was the outcome of those incidents? I mean, we asked well over a year ago for some figures and statistics. Now, I appreciate what you're saying is a report will come at some point and be on the intranet. I know not when, but that's a year and a half ago by the time we actually see the report, when we asked for the statistics of what was being done a year ago. And as far as I'm aware, we've still not seen any. So how many incidents have we responded to in the last 12 months? How many people have we assisted in the outcome? I'm just trying to get a flavour. I don't doubt you do it. I'm just trying to get a flavour of what the quantum is.
I'll hand over to Mark in a second, but if you just look at paragraph 20 there, the Homes for Ukraine, that's so far as of today, that's 1,000 individuals in approximately 300 family groups. There's a significant program of work, both in terms of giving them payments to the guests and supporting the sponsors, both into getting settled, into housing, into education. So that's one example in terms of some of those figures. And again, we can provide more detail on that Homes for Ukraine scheme. In terms of avian influenza, it's a shame that Gary went, because that's an area he's leading on. So clearly there have been both wild birds and domestic bird incidents, and there's been various closures and inspections in place. But you know, that level of detail can be provided. Mark, do you want to?
Yeah, of course. So we keep a record of how many calls the duty officers received, for instance. So within the last 12 months, we're on about 75 calls. Some of those are within hours, some are out of hours, and they come from a range of sources. So we can provide that information, certainly. The level of detail we go into in tracking those is quite high level. We don't necessarily sort of detail it by step, but for instance, I was on call last Saturday and I had a phone call from Derbyshire who had a fireworks factory that had gone up in flames just over the border. So I would just sort of jot that down as a very general statement, but we can certainly provide that. Sorry, if I may, Chair, as well. One of the things that's on our work plan as well is looking at training for elected members. So, we could certainly organise briefings around what the structures would be, perhaps look at some scenarios and just detail how the plan would say we respond. But like that saying goes, the plan only ever survives first contact, doesn't it, with the enemy? So we can look at doing that training. That's something we can certainly develop.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah. One more question.
Interesting. I don't want to go into depth. I mean, just to get a flavour of number instance, but I'm just interested in what you said. So why does an event in Derbyshire affect us when this is the Leicestershire and Leicestershire Resilience Forum? So what's Derbyshire got to do with us? Haven't they got a resilience forum?
Yeah, so the call was from their out of hours version of me, essentially. The reason it affects us, it was quite close to EMA and East Midlands Airport. The cloud potentially was a bit of a nasty cloud, and it's just them sharing that understanding. So Zafar referred to sort of the National Resilience Framework, and one of those is around sharing risks and understandings across borders. So really that was just a good example, I suppose, of them sharing a risk within their border that potentially could have a knock-on effect for us as well.
Okay, yeah. So you certainly had no lack of incidents and response, and as I say, it does seem to have worked exceptionally well over the last 2 years. Now, I don't want to tempt Providence, but yeah, you never know what's around the corner. So we're asked to note this report, and can I take it that will be noted and that all comments will be kept as usual? Is that agreed? Agreed. Yeah. Now, before we move on to the next item, I'll just go back to the RIPA report. We've got to move a couple of items there. So firstly, we needed to note the use of the Regulatory Investigation Powers and the Investigatory Powers Act for the period from the 1st of January to the 31st of December 22. Is that agreed? Yeah. And secondly, to review the Council's covert surveillance and the acquisition of communication data policy, which is unchanged since approved by the Cabinet in March 2021, and confirm that it remains fit for purpose. I'm happy to move this recommendation. Can I have a seconder? Thank you. All those in favour? Lovely, thank you. Right, well, subject to that, we'll get it dated. Yep. I take it that's agreed, and so that is agreed. Finally, to agree to continue to receive an annual report on the use of RIPA and the IPA powers. I'm happy to move that. Can I have a seconder? Thank you. All in favour? Thanks. Okay, so now on to the next item, which is the contracts exception report, which was requested by the committee at its last meeting. So we have with us today Kate Springthorpe, Procurement and Commissioning Support Manager, who is going to present this item. So, Kate, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So there are two elements to this report. The first element is obviously the mapping out of the process in which the exceptions follow, dependent on the different exceptions. So just like to ask if anybody's got any questions or any clarifications they'd like around those process flows and that first element of the paper.
Yep. Thank you, Kate. So we've all read the report. Has anybody got any questions on it? Just no. No. Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
So
that's right. So, okay.
Chair, if it's okay, I'd like to then move on to the second part of the report. Thank you.
Please do. Yeah.
Which is basically providing the committee the details of the exceptions that were reported in the last period. So I've provided them in a table, but I'm just going to talk you through some of the reasons behind each of these. So when we look at the first one on the list, which is the traffic orders, this is a contract that is a statutory requirement for the council. It's something that we have been rolling with certain publishing companies, and we'd identified a potential cost saving with a different procurement route, but it was going to take longer to fully establish the market and to understand those routes than what was available to us. So this extension was put in place for 6 months to allow us the time to re-procure. That re-procurement has now happened, and we've actually made a saving of about £300,000 over 2 years. So it's quite significant, and it was definitely worth extending for. The second item, which is the support systems, this is for our highways team where the public can log in, make reports on potholes, incidences that they've seen. It's quite an important and high risk contract to us in terms of making sure that we are acting quickly to those issues. There are huge implications in changing a system like this, both from an ICT perspective and from a public perspective. There wasn't enough capacity or time in order to procure this, so it was extended, and that's currently going through its re-procurement now. The third item is for agency staff. So as you may or may not be aware, there are issues across the country in getting social care staff and workers. We have an agency contract in place, which is with Reed, and there have been instances where they've just purely not been able, due to capacity and issues, been able to fulfil those temporary vacancies for us. So we had to go off contract in quite an urgent way to get those agency workers in. So that exception is purely to support the contract that we already have, and we are discussing with our contract with Reed about how we could improve on this going forward and what else we could do as a council to try and bring social workers in. The next item is about safe and sustainable travel. So this was a further award to existing suppliers to allow additional time for procurement in what was deemed to be at the time a volatile market off the back of COVID. So we're currently going through transport strategy and reviewing that for procurement as we speak. The next item is one that we talked about that should have gone to Cabinet, but didn't. And the reason for that was, as you will see from the process flows, anything that falls under social care isn't a requirement to be approved by Cabinet. It's normally a reactive requirement. We need to place somebody in a residential home or some sort of urgent requirement. This contract is an adult social care contract, and it was just misclassified when they were putting the exception together. They thought that it just needed chief officer sign off. It's a contract that we've got with small local providers. We've seen a reduction in those providers over recent times, and they wanted some additional time to work with the market to try and build up more local small providers to support with installing minor adaptations into people's homes, etc. The next item is an extension of hire charge for Whetstone and Bardon. So projects that have been ongoing, they've had bits of equipment and facilities on hire there, and they needed to extend those. It didn't make sense to go out to tender for them again because they already had the equipment there. It would have been too timely and costly, so they extended that provision, and that was under an extension, so it wasn't actually required to go to Cabinet. And the final one on the list is the public rights of way. That essentially was extended due to the requirement of a continuity of service for a statutory duty in which we provide whilst the re-procurement occurs, and that is underway currently. Hopefully that gives.
Thank you very much, Gary, particularly with the explanation on the exceptions. Has any member got any questions or queries on the report? Yep. Right, consents, yes. So there are no other questions. So can I take the report as being noted and that all comments made will be captured in the minutes? Yeah, I think the amount of money saved is, I mean, the first decision on there regarding the environment transport, I mean, that saved us £300,000. So it shows the value of having the exceptions. We certainly could, Mr. Bill. We certainly could. If you find any, let us know. Yeah. All right. So we take that as notes. Everybody happy to agree? So the next item is the Internal Audit Service External Quality Assessment. We have Neil Jones, Head of Internal Audit, and he's going to present this item. So over to you, Neil.
Thanks, Chair. This is quite a short report, really, for information. And it's just explaining that as part of internal audit standards, which committee knows about, I've been talking about for a number of years, that I have to arrange an external quality assessment of the Council's internal audit service every 5 years. So paragraph 4 briefly explains what a quality assessment should do. Excuse me. Paragraph 7 and 8 on page 94 just briefly explain and give the outlines, the advantages and disadvantages of both approaches. And in both of these approaches, either a full external assessment or a validation of my team's self-assessment, the cost will be a factor, hence the external reference. Paragraphs 9 and 10 explain a previous assessment, which seemed like yesterday, which was an independent validation, was 5 years ago, 2018, and that was an independent valuation of our self-assessment, and it was low cost. I think it's about £3,500. That provider is unavailable, unfortunately, this time around to do the same work, so I'll have to research availabilities and providers in the current market to see what sort of preferred approach will be. Paragraph, page 65, paragraphs 11 and 12, just outline the scope of the information required and how the project is likely to pan out. And then finally, paragraph 13 explains how, after completing the research and evaluation, I'll notify the committee before determining the approach to be taken. I think that's all I've got to say, really. Take any questions.
Thank you, Neil. There's any questions? It's, again, it seems fairly straightforward report. And no member has any questions. Okay, so moving to recommendation, which is set out on page 96 of the agenda pack, the committee is asked to note the report and support the proposed approach to determine the preferred method of conducting the external quality assessment of the internal audit services. Can I take this as agreed if there is no dissent? That's agreed. Thank you. So the next item is item 12. This is the SIPA Financial Management Code 2122. We have with us today Nick Walsh, who's going to present this item. So over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Chair. So this report is to inform the committee that the Council complies with the new SIPA Financial Management Code for the 21-22 financial year. The code's designed to support best practice in financial management and help local authorities to demonstrate financial stability. So a self-assessment has been undertaken, the results of which are included in the appendix. The assessment shows that the council met the requirements of the code with a few areas of improvement identified, and those areas were the self-assessments of conformance to the SIPA standard on the role of the head of internal audit, opportunities to compare LCC's financial management and financial sustainability to other local authorities, This has been updated and shows that LCC has only one high risk indicator compared to other authorities, and that's around the levels of service growth that we have in our medium-term financial strategy. The planning process needs to focus on ensuring sufficient developer funding is available for infrastructure growth. The post-implementation reviews for all significant capital schemes, we need to be more consistent with that, and balance sheet reconciliations are undertaken quarterly. The Internal Audit Service has completed a high-level review of the assessment and concluded that there are no other issues to report. This assessment will be repeated for the 22 financial year and obviously subsequent years as we go forward. All I was going to say by way of introduction.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Nick. So, has anybody got any questions on this? No, again, it's a fairly comprehensive report. Mr. Richardson.
Just a very quick one. I think you probably answered it. I mean, did we actually find the exercise useful? I mean, were there things in there that we didn't know or we weren't doing? I mean, so the time spent doing it, did we learn anything substantial that we weren't aware of? I mean, I've always been very impressed at how well we run here financially, and therefore all I'm concerned is, has this created extra work and we didn't get any benefits from it, or did we genuinely get benefits from it?
Well, it's exposed a few areas where perhaps we just need to tighten up a little bit, but I suppose it's always useful to have some confirmation that there's no underlying problems or things that we haven't noticed, and by going through this exercise you'd kind of pick up on that. But has it told us a lot we didn't already know? Probably not a huge amount, no, in honesty.
Neil.
Yeah, could I just add from a different perspective, because Joe undertook the audit, or the desktop audit of the compliance against the code. The code itself is quite a beast. It's got a lot in there. It was all the code and the resilience index were all promoted when organisations started to fail, to make sure organisations had got a good handle on things. We have. Where I think this will end up, I think it will just be added to the compendium of stuff that the external auditor starts to look at for your governance arrangements. So each year that they do their value for money assessment, they're asking additional questions. Have you got this? Have you got that? So they've not touched on the code at county. They have it another organisation where I provide audit to. So I think it's a little bit of a necessary evil in some ways, but it is quite a bit of a beast to look at in its self format. But I think there's future things that's going to come out of the coding.
Thanks very much, Nick. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Neil. I mean, I think that was the point I was making. As I said, I believe we're a very well-run organisation, particularly financially. And all it worries me about these new regulations coming out is they put an extra burden of work both on the team and you as auditing it, and inevitably it will increase the cost of our external audit if they look at more and more things. So I was just trying to get a flavour of, were the benefits we got out of this greater than the burdens we're taking on and the increased audit costs we're likely to have, which I suspect the answer is no, but I think you've covered that very well, thank you.
I can't comment on the cost because I think the cost is another issue, but I think what hopefully, having done it this year and then pick up again, it will actually make the external auditor move on quicker in terms of that area, because they know that we've done it and we've done it. The organisation's done it properly. Compared to somebody who's probably played, scant notice of it, and then they might have to ask further questions. So, in terms of what we've done as an organisation and the audit, I think that's a good baseline.
Yeah, it's just making sure we comply with the code and that our risks are substantially reduced. And clearly, from what's been said, we do. And the value to us may not be great, but it could be to other organisations who aren't performing as well. So, if there are no other questions, can I take the report as being noted and that all the comments made will be captured in the minutes in the usual way? Can I take that as agreed? That's agreed. Right. The next item is item 13, which is the annual Treasury Management Strategy Statement. 23 to 24 are set out on pages 115 to 148 of the agenda pack. Nick, over to you again, please, to present this item.
Oh, thank you. Including economic growth and environmental sustainability. But the County Council has not borrowed externally for more than a decade now. And going forwards, any new investments will only be made where they are compliant with the updated CITFA code. The statement itself covers the economic background, reporting and training, the levels of investments and approach to borrowing. It also includes the annual investment strategy, which sets out the investment policy, the management of risk and the investment counterparty list. It also includes the minimum revenue provision statement as Annex 1, to which no changes are proposed for 23-24, and the prudential and treasury management indicators in Annex 2, sorry. For 23-24, there is a requirement for a new prudential indicator to be included. The liability benchmark, that's page 144 of the pack, which shows in a graphical form the projection of loan debt that the council needs each year into the future to fund its existing debt liabilities. And as has been the case for some time, the chart shows the council has more debt than it requires due to the level of cash balances and the council's current over-borrowed position, which arises from historic borrowing and no meaningful opportunities to repay debt early, and MRP set aside. As we already know, as already known, but in graphical form, the chart indicates that indicating that no external borrowing is likely to be required for the current capital programme spending plans. Annex 3 to the strategy includes the policy on approved organisations for lending and the limits. Average treasury management balances have risen in recent years and are now at around £400 million, which reserves provisions, Section 106 balances, government grants received in advance, and simple net working capital balances of the council. So in order for us to be able to maintain a flexible and risk-averse approach to treasury management and sufficient counterparties on the strategy, it includes proposed changes to some of those limits as set out in the table below paragraph 15 of the report. Those were the
has any member got any queries or questions on the report? The minutes. Can I take this as agreed? Yeah, thank you. So the final item on today's agenda is the quarterly treasury management report as set out on pages 149 to 162 of the agenda pack. Again, Nick, over to you to introduce this report and present it.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, as stated, the report summarises the position as at the end of December, so the end of quarter 3. Paragraphs 2 to 8 summarise what Treasury Management is and the committee's responsibilities, which I covered in some detail last time, so I won't go through that again today, but it's obviously there in all the reports just to remind us. Paragraphs 9 to 12 of the report summarise the key points that arose from Link's latest quarterly economic summary, and it reflects on October's rebound of gross domestic product month on month. November also shows a further modest increase based on latest information available, and then depending on the December's figures, which when they're available, the economy could potentially avoid recession in 2022, but it remains to be seen what that final month's figures are. Inflation has, of course, started to fall back from the 11.1% peak in October last year. Some commodity prices are actually starting to fall back, which means inflationary pressures should start to ease over the coming year. And I think that the key point to note is that the market expectation that interest rates will peak now at a much lower point than previously forecast. 4.5% looks likely to be the peak, probably around the middle of this current year. Moving on to the section starting from paragraph 13. The table summarises the position on the private debt investments. The full 10 million from the CFR 5 investment was called up during the period, and also a further 0.3 million of the MAC 6 investment, which leaves 1.2 million yet to be called up. It's too early to have received any income from these investments, but you'll see that 18.8 million invested in MAC 6 now has a market value of 19.3 based on current estimates. A further 0.5 million was received back from the MAC 4 fund. 0.4 million of that was capital, which leaves 8.5 million still invested, and a further 0.1 million was income, which takes the total income received to date for that fund to 3.1 million. There's a short-term investments, so the section from paragraph 16. It shows that the balances of short-term investments fell from 405 million to the end of last quarter to 369 million at the end of December. There's 235 million pounds worth of loans, which have got an average APR of 1.65% outstanding that matured, and 176 million of new loans that have an average of APR of 3.59% were taken out. Information in that table in paragraph 16 is also included around the average maturity of loans in terms of numbers of days, which has reduced from 147 days down to 115 days, which reflects the fact that the money is being kept shorter to manage the cash flow, and primarily around the reason that we don't receive a preset payment in December, so we needed to keep money a little bit shorter to cover that. Moving down to the table in paragraph 20 shows the investments outstanding at the end of the period. Further information is included in the diagrams under paragraph 21, which shows how the funding is split across institutions geographically and also by sovereign and institutional credit rating. The majority of funds in both cases are held within the three highest credit rating categories. And then moving on, paragraph 23, you'll see that the weighted APR on the investment portfolio has increased from 2.26% in quarter 2 to 3.19% in quarter 3. And obviously the price on these short-term investments is just simply determined by what the market expectations are on how interest rates will change over the loan period. And as interest rates have increased, it's been harder to obtain 6 to 12 month investments in excess of base rate over that period, which is why the blue line has fallen below the orange line in terms of the table, in terms of the graph under paragraph 23. However, once the peak has been reached, this trend should start to reverse. Paragraph 24 informs members that no loans were made that subsequently breached the authorised counterparty lists during this period, and paragraph 25 just puts in writing the point I made at the last meeting that the County Council had no investments with Qatari banks and so avoided any criticism that was directed towards some local authorities on that point during the World Cup. Paragraph 27 shows that during the period the Council has operated within the Treasury and prudential indicators, and that, more importantly, going forward, no difficulties are envisaged in complying with those in the short term. And then finally, in paragraph 28, it shows that the latest estimate for interest over the current year will be around £6 million from Treasury management activity, which is clearly significantly more than the 1.4 million we budgeted for, and of course down solely to the fact interest rates being much higher over the period than expected when the budget was set. So sorry, that's taken a little while to go through that, Chair, but hopefully that picks up all the key points. And
Thank you very much, Nick. Now, do any members have any queries or questions on the report? Neil.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Nick. I always find these reports quite interesting, particularly the sort of forecasting that Link Assessment provide us. And I note that the forecast from Link is for the bank base rate perhaps to stabilise at 4.5% in the mid part of the year. Is there any information from Link as to whether or not it will remain about at that level, or do they forecast a slight reduction in the bank base rate toward the end of the calendar/financial year?
yeah, we have longer term projections available, and the 4.5%. I mean, it's likely to fall away from that probably towards the end of the year, and then eventually it will fall back down to a rate of more like 2%. I'd say over kind of the next kind of 2 years or so. That's their expectation at present.
So that may be encouraging for particularly new time house buyers and the like, who perhaps may struggle this year to get some mortgages, but it's more optimistic for 2024.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Although, of course, the flip side of that is we won't be earning so much on our investments going forward. That's a small negative. Yeah.
I'm going to make the very point myself about well, I think for the general public, it's a very welcome reversal if it goes down to 2%. So if there are no other questions, then the committee is asked to note the report. Can I take it as noted? Yep. Thanks very much. So the date of the next meeting of the Corporate Governance Committee is scheduled to be held on the 26th of May 2023. I just need to make members aware that an additional meeting will be needed to arrange in order for us to consider the external audit of the accounts. Officers will be in touch to arrange this as soon as they are able. Now, before we go and close the meeting, Neil, you wanted to have a quick word about the 26th of May.
That's correct, Chair. So switched on. At the November committee, members finally received the updated audit committee guidance from SIPFA, and there was a request at the meeting to provide some briefing and training on the implications of that. So the next corporate governance committee is on the 26th of May. What we plan to do, that's in the afternoon. What we plan to do here is have the briefing on the morning of the 26th of May, so that it's on the same day. That hopefully would ensure full attendance from members. There may be new members to the committee. We may have the independent member. That's part of the reasons. But the plan is we would start, say, 10 o'clock in the morning, and then as well as providing the updated work plan for the committee, which I think we've done some work on. The main focus would be what were the changes in requirements in that guidance, and what does the Corporate Governance Committee need to develop going forward. 3 areas I can see: the self-assessment of good practice, self-evaluation of the effectiveness of the committee. Morning, and in the afternoon we've just been talking about the treasury management and the reference to Link. So we thought what we'd do for the afternoon was to widen out the treasury management section and invite register on that date.
Thank you very much, Neil. So that's noted. There are no urgent items, so just remains me to thank all the officers who attended today for their presentations, and I now declare this meeting closed.